On July 21st, the Germans intercepted a radio message calling American commanders to an orders meeting. This confirmed their suspicion that the U.S. First Army was planning a large-scale offensive, though they were still unsure of the attack's exact location. General Field Marshal von Kluge believed that the primary assault in Normandy would again come from the British on the KH front. In the covert world of signal intercepts, the Allies enjoyed a significant advantage. General Bradley was aware from ultra-intelligence that the overstretched German forces were on the brink of collapse, making it the right moment for a breakthrough. Bradley's forces had finally reached the long straight road running from Leh on the west coast via Perrier to Street Low, the launching point for Operation Cobra. On July 22nd, the Germans launched a sudden attack against the American 90th Division, which was already struggling due to officer casualties. This attack led to one unit surrendering and most others breaking and withdrawing in disarray. Heavy rain starting on July 20th and low clouds that persisted led to delays in Operation Cobra. The intense downpours had turned the KRA boxes used by soldiers to line their foxholes into a soggy mess. The delays were frustrating, but Brigadier General Rose, one of the finest armored commanders in the U.S. Army, used the time to intensively train his tank infantry teams. Bradley was determined to break through with heavy bombers but aimed to avoid the mistakes of Operation Goodwood, where the advance had failed to follow quickly enough to exploit the shock effect. On July 19th, Bradley flew back to England to discuss the bombing plan with the Air Force commanders. He requested only light bombs to avoid deep craters that could slow down his armored forces. The target area for saturation bombing was a rectangle along the south side of the Perrier Street Low Road. The air chiefs agreed to Bradley's request but insisted that they could not attack along the road due to the need to come in from the north over the waiting army. They also believed that withdrawing the frontline troops by only half a mile for safety would not be enough. The Army and the Air Force compromised on a 1,200-yard withdrawal. Meteorological reports predicted that the skies would clear by midday on July 24th, and 1300 hours was set as H. Hour. Air Marshal L. Mallory had flown out to Normandy to observe the operation personally. However, the skies did not clear as expected. Mallory decided that visibility was insufficient and sent a signal back to England to postpone the attack. But the bombers were already en route. An order to abort the mission was issued, but some aircraft had already released their bombs, with one bomber accidentally dropping its load a mile north of the intended target. The rest of the formation followed suit. The soldiers of the 30th Division, who were not in foxholes but standing around or sitting on vehicles, saw the bombers overhead and then heard the distinctive rustling sound of bombs being released. They scrambled for cover, resulting in 25 men being killed and 131 wounded. General Bradley was furious. He had expected the air chiefs to comply with his demand for an attack along the road, not perpendicular to it. With the decision needing to be made quickly to launch Cobra the following day, Bradley reluctantly agreed to the Air Force commander's approach. After briefing the press, the staff officers emphasized the operation as a significant breakthrough, omitting any mention of the casualties caused by their own bombs. At the same time, a Soviet military mission from London, including General Hodges and Soviet officers, was visiting the 1st U.S. Army. The Soviet officers, dressed in red striped trousers and gold shoulder boards, showed keen interest in the American operations, but were visibly disconcerted by a staff officer's comment about the quality of German soldiers. It was likely more the reminder of the million former Red Army soldiers serving in German uniforms under duress that unsettled them. Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, commander of ground forces, was another observer. His visit was highly secretive, as he was set to take over from Patton as the commander of the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group threatening the Pas-de-Calais. McNair had traveled to the front lines and was observing the bombing from there when the Germans launched one of their sharp artillery salvos. With H. Hour now set for 1100 hours, the bombing was repeated. Fighter bombers arrived on time, striking their targets between the front line and the Street Low Perrier Road with precision. The soldiers cheered as the heavy bombers approached. However, a breeze from the south, unaccounted for, blew smoke and dust north across the Perrier Street Low Road, causing subsequent bombing waves to fall short of their targets. Forward companies threw orange smoke grenades as a warning, but the drifting smoke and dust obscured their positions. There was no radio link between the ground and the heavy bombers, leaving the infantry and General McNair exposed. In the forward infantry regiments, 101 men were killed and 463 wounded, including McNair, whose body was taken to a field hospital and kept secret. The companies affected by the bombing anticipated that the hour of attack would be postponed. After the events of the previous day, Bradley insisted on launching Operation Cobra immediately, though this was optimistic given the circumstances. The bombing had caused the advancing infantry to pull back, resulting in a loss of contact with the tanks. Meanwhile, the Germans who had endured the full brunt of the bombing were in a worse state. The Panzer Lehr Division and the 75th Infantry Division were at the center of the devastation. Panzer Lehr had been heavily hit the day before, even by the limited bombing, and German artillery had expended much of its already reduced supply of ammunition. Believing it to be the main attack, Bohlen had pulled back the bulk of his forces, placing them directly in the target area for July 25. Some German commanders even thought they had repelled the aborted attack the day before, causing confusion about the American plans. Field Marshal von Klug suspected that the bombing on July 24 might have been a diversion for a major British offensive. He visited the front of Panzer Group West and conferred with General Eber. His suspicions seemed to be confirmed when Montgomery launched Operation Spring the following dawn, just 4 hours before Cobra began in earnest. This Canadian Corps attempt to seize the Verrières Ridge beside the Quayfales Road failed dismally, but had an unintended benefit. Klug, now even more convinced that Falaise was the key Allied objective, delayed the transfer of 2 panzer divisions from the British to the American sector by over 24 hours, and they did not reach the front in strength for another 2 days. Despite the failures of Goodwood and Spring to achieve a breakthrough, they had met Montgomery's primary objective. The full bombing on July 25 had a devastating impact on both German soldiers and vehicles. The landscape resembled the moon, with everything burned and blasted. Vehicles could not be brought up or recovered, and survivors were described as maddened and unusable. Panzer Lehr reportedly lost 25 tanks, 10 assault guns, and nearly 1,000 men, with a paratroop regiment in their sector annihilated. An American infantry officer noted that the area resembled plowed earth, with few survivors and a jumble of destroyed trucks, guns, and machines. Panther tanks were found overturned like turtles. However, resistance was not entirely eliminated. The 4th Infantry Division, still waiting for tanks to arrive, advanced about 700 yards before encountering German positions supported by tanks in a sunken track. Bazooka teams knocked out some tanks and engaged a group of Germans. The 4th Infantry Division managed only a mile-and-a-half advance, and the 9th and 30th Divisions on either flank achieved little more. There was a general feeling of disappointment with the bombing's results, and both commanders and troops were overly cautious due to weeks of bocage fighting. On July 26, General Collins made a bold decision to deploy the armored divisions ahead of schedule. That day, the Germans sent their last reserves towards La Chapelle-Longue, but these were soon hit by fighter-bomber attacks. The sector between the 4th and 9th Divisions became nearly open, although Schultitz and Hare did not fully grasp the extent of the danger, partly due to destroyed landlines. The 4th Infantry Division advanced effectively, with many Germans still appearing shaken despite the delay. Numerous prisoners were taken, looking defeated. In one instance, 3 Panther tanks were surrounded, and their crews surrendered. The 30th Division, having recovered well from the accidental bombing, faced intense fighting around Herouville, just northwest of Street Low, but German resistance began to collapse rapidly. On the morning of July 26, Collins ordered the 1st Division with a combat command of the 3rd Armored Division to advance on the right, while Brigadier General Rose's combat command of the 2nd Armored Division was to attack on the left, initially with the 30th Division, and then continuing south toward Senel. Rose's intensive training in combined arms tactics paid off, with infantry riding tanks and the 3rd Battalion following behind in trucks. Roads cratered by bombing and shelling sometimes impeded progress, but the infantry dismounted when encountering resistance. To address resupply issues, Rose had ensured extra rations, grenades, and ammunition were loaded onto the tanks. The 2nd Armored Division, known as Hell on Wheels, had been shaped by General Patton himself. The 2nd Armored Division, known for its hard drinking and hard fighting reputation, cleared the small town of Sanil on the Cautensano Road. Once Rose's armored column was out of the bombed area and past Sanil, the rate of advance increased. Despite nightfall, Rose saw no reason to halt, and his armor bypassed German positions. Some German vehicles, mistaking the column for their own retreating units, joined the Americans and were promptly captured. On the road south to Kessy, Rose's Shermans blasted German half-tracks, which were poorly defended with only machine guns. The area was in flames from previous P-47 Thunderbolt attacks, and the armored column had to navigate through rubble. Rose, eager to keep the momentum, pushed his men towards Lune-Herman, over 7 miles south of Street Low. On the right flank, the 1st Infantry Division and Combat Command A of the 3rd Armored Division, under Brigadier General Doyle O'Hickey, advanced south. They spotted an assault gun and a Mark V tank at Montreux Lune. A squadron of P-47 Thunderbolts was called in, destroying the assault gun and causing the tank crew to flee. Each combat command had an air support party riding in tanks, thanks to Bradley's orders and the effective liaison with Lieutenant General Elwood R. Quesada, Chief of the 9th Air Force Tactical Air Command. Quesada, unlike most airmen, was enthusiastic about ground support, leading to a system where fighter-bomber squadrons were constantly on hand to provide support, similar to the cab rank system used by the British Second Army. On July 26, Quesada's fighter-bombers were out in force. One German commander complained that they hovered overhead like hawks, constantly watching for movement and then attacking. Hickey's combat command and the 1st Division pushed south to Marini, nearly 4 miles beyond the Perrier-Sanlo Road. At 13 o'clock on July 26, a Piper Cub pilot reported friendly tanks in Marini, but the town did not fall immediately due to blocked roads and collapsing burning houses. The Americans took nearly 200 German prisoners, many of whom were fresh replacements. By nightfall, Marini was secured with very light American casualties. One battalion reported only a dozen wounded for the entire day. Fortunately for American tank units, the Germans were running low on 88mm shells, as an ultra-intercept on July 26 revealed. Another intercept showed that the Germans still believed the main attack would come from the Cayenne front rather than the western coast. Choltitz, closer to the crisis, began withdrawing his forces between Perrier and the coast, leaving only a light screen behind, which proved ineffective as the American 6th Armored Division advanced. The 6th Armored pushed through the coast road, leaving the infantry to mop up behind them. General Patton, waiting impatiently for his 3rd Army to become operational, received a call from Bradley inviting him to dinner in formal attire. Patton was slightly taken aback, as he always dressed well, but Bradley's invitation was actually to discuss the secret burial of General McNair. The American breakthrough had a significant impact on German morale. Soldiers began discussing their dire situation openly, which they had previously avoided. A senior medical unit officer, Klein, described the night of July 26 when they were ordered to abandon their dressing station south of Street Low. He recorded a conversation with a severely wounded corporal who had previously earned a German Cross in Gold for tank kills on the Eastern Front. The corporal expressed despair, stating that the war in Normandy was no longer a fair fight. The enemy was superior in both men and material, and the German High Command was failing to support them with sufficient resources. On July 27, Bradley issued new orders, as Cobra was progressing well. He wanted a full-out advance to Avranches, the gateway to Brittany. Despite a proposal from British Airborne Forces Commander Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Browning for a paratroop drop on Avranches, Bradley rejected the idea. An airdrop would reduce the operational flexibility he required, as it would create a moral imperative to relieve the airborne forces before anything else. Instead, Bradley decided to give Patton unofficial command over V Corps in the West, even though the 3rd Army would not be operational until August 1st. Patton's principals, Wood's 4th Armored Division and the 6th Armored Division, became the spearheads for V Corps. German commanders soon realized the extent of the disaster. Their reactions had been slow, partly because American tactics involved cutting all communication lines. Many German troops were shocked to find American forces far behind what they thought was the front line. German officers in a Vida-Cavalwagen nearly collided with an American column, and motorcyclists who approached American vehicles were often shot. On July 27, General Mindel signaled that the paratroop corps south of Street Low in the Vire Valley had been severely depleted to 3,400 men due to heavy losses and was no longer able to withstand serious Allied pressure. Club, recognizing the gravity of the American offensive, reluctantly agreed to the request for panzer reinforcements from Hauser and ordered the transfer of the 2nd and 116th Panzer Divisions from the British front. That evening, Lutz went to visit Mindel's headquarters, where he encountered a chaotic situation. The din of shellfire and tank engines was so overwhelming that communication was nearly impossible, and the command post was camouflaged by heaps of rubble. Mindel, frustrated that Lutz was not under his direct command, expressed his belief that launching an attack, especially during daylight, was madness. Lutz insisted that all he needed was assurance that his right flank would be secured during the attack, but Mindel was skeptical about the Panzer Division's effectiveness. Lutz was then summoned to Hause's 7th Army Command Post, located about 10 miles south of Percy. He was briefed by General von Funk, who instructed him to cross the Vere River at Tessie and advance northwest to block the road from Street Low to Percy, which was the route Brigadier General Rose's column was taking. The 2nd Panzer Division was to follow, but by the time they began crossing the river on the night of July 27th, they were already too late to halt the American advance. The 6th Armored Division reached Coutances on July 27th, finding that their reconnaissance unit had already secured the town. They quickly moved on towards Granville. German infantry hid in the hedgerows on either side of the road, so the 6th Armored's light tanks advanced with machine gun fire. Brigadier General Hickey's column of the 3rd Armored Division was also heading towards Granville, but General Collins and Colonel Luckett criticized the 3rd Armored for being too cautious. The advance was further complicated by traffic congestion and knocked out German vehicles blocking the roads. Bradley had anticipated such problems and had assembled 15,000 engineers for Operation Cobra. Their main tasks included opening and maintaining main supply routes through the gap, filling craters, clearing wrecked vehicles, and building bypasses around destroyed towns. On July 28th, visibility improved, benefiting the American commanders. Lutz's attack with the 2nd Panzer Division west of the Vere River was quickly disrupted by air attacks, and the 116th Panzer Division fared little better. Schulte's corps was in danger of encirclement, leading the 7th Army headquarters to order a withdrawal towards the center near Roni. Obersturmbannführer Ben Führer-Tuchen, the new commander of the Das Reich Division, was killed by a U.S. reconnaissance unit near his command post. In the evening, Sturmbannführer B of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division took command of the remnants of both divisions and urgently requested reinforcements. He asked for the 9th Panzer Division from the south of France and more infantry divisions. Oku responded swiftly to this request. With many German troops retreating around Roni, Combat Command B of the 2nd Armored Division started establishing blocking points south. However, on the night of July 28th, the U.S. Army faced its own logistical challenges. The mechanized routes further north in the Breakthrough Corridor were so congested that elements of the 4th Infantry Division's headquarters were stuck on the road. Throughout the night, bottlenecks on the roads were caused by knocked-out enemy vehicles blocking muddy spots. Engineers struggled to clear these obstacles, with one staff officer commandeering a bulldozer to move a burnt-out vehicle himself. French civilians, working furiously to help, declined any payment, insisting they were doing it to aid the Allied advance. General Hubner of the 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One, was determined to maintain momentum. He enforced a strict one-way traffic rule on the narrow Norman roads, forbidding even ambulances from returning. Casualties were to be cared for along the route of advance. On July 29th, Rose's Combat Command F from the 2nd Armored Division faced tough resistance on the road south to Villa Boden. They encountered a strong defense at the crossroads of Lenier, manned by nearly 20 tanks and 2 companies of Panzer Grenadiers from Litz's 2nd Panzer Division. Although Litz's division and the newly arrived 116th Panzer Division had been ordered to strike west and cut off the American advance, Litz decided to prioritize protecting the flank along the Vere River, which was under pressure from the American 30th Infantry Division. American tank destroyers managed to knock out several panzer tanks, forcing the remainder to withdraw eastwards to Mayen, where a more intense battle occurred. A column of tanks from Rose's Combat Command, supported by infantry from the 4th Infantry Division, advanced into Mayan. Captain Reed led a patrol around the east side, where his men took out an anti-tank gun crew but encountered heavy fire from German tanks. Private Shockey used a bazooka to knock out a tank, and Captain Reed utilized white phosphorus grenades to set another tank ablaze. Despite sustaining severe injuries, Shockey was able to retreat with the others. The decision to pull back from Mayan was made by the tank battalion commander, and this was met with criticism from Major Latimer, who believed infantry should hold the ground they had taken. German panzer grenadiers quickly reoccupied the town, bringing in more tanks and artillery. The ensuing battle was brutal, with high casualties and significant artillery fire. American forces experienced both physical and psychological strain, with some men breaking down under the pressure. The 30th Infantry Division eventually relieved the task force late in the day, and the only satisfaction was witnessing German bombers mistakenly attack their own forces. Meanwhile, on July 29th, P-47 Thunderbolts from the 405th Fighter Group targeted a massive traffic jam of German vehicles east of Roni. They bombed and struck the area for 6.5 hours, claiming significant damage to German tanks and vehicles. RAF Typhoons from 121 Wing also attacked another column south of Roni. Combat Command B of the 2nd Armored Division finished setting up roadblocks and ambushes in the Grimes-Nil area. The Germans, heavily pressured by the 3rd Armored Division to the north, attempted to escape past these positions. The 82nd Reconnaissance Battalion, aided by anti-tank guns, and the 92nd Field Artillery Battalion, destroyed a German column that was mistakenly led by captured American armored cars. In the chaos, the command post of the 2nd Armored Division's reserve was nearly overrun during a surprise attack. Defenders, mostly rear echelon personnel, held their ground using the light from burning vehicles to target the advancing German infantry. On the night of July 30th, armored infantry setting up a roadblock were ambushed by German vehicles rolling down the hill with their engines off. The battle was fierce, with heavy casualties from both enemy fire and friendly artillery. Lieutenant Colonel Crowley arrived at 7 o'clock on July 30th to find the area littered with burning vehicles and the roadblock overrun. On the morning of July 30th, the aftermath of the night's fighting was grim. Despite continuous fire from the 4th Armored Division to the west, Colonel Crowley managed to re-establish radio communication and coordinate efforts. The Germans, exhausted and demoralized by the artillery, suffered heavy losses. American forces captured 300 prisoners, but the real challenge was enduring the fire from their own forces, as well as the Germans. 2 main German columns were trying to escape that night. One column included a mix of vehicles: tanks, 150mm and 170mm guns, half-tracks, staff cars, motorcycles, and trucks from the 275th Infantry Division, the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, and the Reconnaissance Battalion of the Das Reich Division. Mortars set many vehicles on fire, and the artillery from the 62nd and 78th Armored Field Artillery kept up a relentless bombardment. A damaged M10 tank destroyer, pretending to be out of commission, ambushed the German column as it passed, destroying several vehicles with its remaining ammunition. The Germans tried to advance, but their progress was thwarted by American tank and mortar fire. The American forces utilized white phosphorus and high-explosive rounds to set German vehicles ablaze and target their infantry. As daylight broke, the tanks pursued nearly 300 German infantrymen attempting to advance through a swamp, resulting in a large number of casualties. Another 600 dead were found along the shelled road, adding to the horrific scene of destruction. In the aftermath, American Graves Registration Services collected 1,150 German dead from the convoy of 96 vehicles. The area was strewn with burning and ruined vehicles, and the situation remained chaotic. The ATC-2 Reconnaissance Battalion moved south to seize bridges over the River Seine. Brigadier General Hickey's combat command from the 3rd Armored Division, following the German retreat, found Ron cluttered with abandoned German equipment, making progress difficult. A tank dozer had to clear the main road, and the sheer number of German soldiers surrendering required sending them to the rear without guards. General Major Rudolf Christoph, the new Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, encountered a disastrous situation at the advanced command post. No orders had been issued to blow bridges, and there were no landline communications. The German retreat from the coast had left the American 6th and 4th Armored Divisions virtually unopposed in Granville. The Germans began destroying port installations and looting vehicles to aid their escape. As night fell, the 7th Army command post was narrowly missed by an American tank platoon. By midnight, the Germans were withdrawing eastward to Morton. The retreat caused panic and confusion at higher command levels, with frantic efforts to prevent further American advances. Despite Hitler's concern about the fate of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division and the overall collapse of the front in Normandy, American forces pressed forward. A reconnaissance troop found side roads blocked, but managed to clear some German soldiers attempting to hide. The 6th and 4th Armored Divisions, under Patton's direction, continued their push toward Avranches, where Patton, in a buoyant mood,